I have the privilege to introduce to you Janet Woodcock. I think all of us in the Duchenne community are becoming very familiar with Cedar, Janet Woodcock, and all of the people that are going to be relevant to look at data and to help us with approvals for changing this community. Dr. Dunn is here from the head of the Cedar Center for Drugs. Teresa Mullins is here as well, and I have the express privilege for lots of other FDA colleagues are in the room. But Janet is here, as you know. She has been instrumental listening to us, maybe once too often sometimes. I'm sure she puts her head over here and says, not one more Duchenne family in my office. But all of them, all members of the FDA have been receptive to us, to listen to us and to spend the day with us. It's been quite a day. So with that, I'm going to turn these last minutes over to Dr. Woodcock to address all of us.
Thanks very much, Pat. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you all hear me? Everyone? All right, well, I'm really thrilled to be here, and I'm sorry I couldn't be here for much of the day, but as Pat said, we had many senior members of our staff here. Dr. Mullen is our lead on patient-focused drug development, and she's going to step up and take a very, very strong role in that, and so she's listening. And Dr. Dunn is our head of the neurology division that looks at least the Cedar therapies, okay, that are directed at neurologic conditions. So, and we do have other members of FDA here, so they were here to listen. You know, I want to talk to you about the role of the patient and the families in spearheading addressing a disease, right? And I think this meeting is very important. I'm glad you were all able to get together, and I think you really learned from each other, and we will learn from you. Generally speaking, for these very serious rare diseases, patient advocacy usually starts by doing two things. Number one is supporting the families and the patients. And of course, that's been going a long time with muscular dystrophy and just providing the help that families need. And that's an important part of patient organizations, is to make sure that help is made available. And then the second thing that usually happens is supporting basic science research. And that's also extremely important, because that's the sort of the plowed field out of which new treatments of different kinds come, or new interventions, as people are saying, mechanical device support or other gizmos that might help make life easier. So I think that kind of support is really important for patient organizations, and many stay in those areas. And often they will include advocacy on behalf of the disease to Congress and so forth. Usually advocacy in support, and advocacy in support of the basic science mission. But what has become clear, we're in a different place now than we used to be. And where we are now is a place where there actually are treatments for many rare diseases and very serious diseases being developed, and actually some of them becoming available, right? And so many patient advocacy groups, or people representing patients and patients themselves, have come together and thought perhaps we can do more than this traditional role, and we can actually be a force, okay, in how new treatments are thought about, how they're developed, and actually how fast they become available, right? And this is really daunting, because all of a sudden you get into technical areas where experts are supposed to do that, do patients know about all these things? But I can tell you, people who are just talking here are very smart, right? We have a lot of smart people in, all over the place. And it is possible, but the communities must come together. If the communities are highly fragmented, then that's a problem, okay? Because you really kind of need to speak with one voice about this, all right? Now, I think the draft guidance that was sent in is a big start, okay? That's a step, okay, which is saying this is what we care about, this is what we think should be studied, and that way the patient voice, the family voice is heard, okay, and thinking about, you know, what is the burden of this disease, what are the impacts of the disease, and what type of endpoints or outcomes should we study if we're trying to ameliorate the disease in some way. So that was a huge step, and your community was the first, really, one of the first, right, for actual patient group to do this. So that's a huge milestone. Now, some other groups, and maybe they aren't as fragmented, maybe they had more money, you know, for, say, cystic fibrosis or multiple myeloma or a few of those. They've actually gone further than that. And what they have done is take some control over development, okay? Because after all, if the patients don't enroll in the trials, then there aren't going to be trials, right? So the people need you. And what really has been done is to make the disease an attractive target, right? So one part of that is to have a clear regulatory pathway to get on the market, okay? So, okay, if we study this and we win and we aren't too toxic, we can get on the market, okay? And patients can help a lot with that. The second, though, is to have a clear and easy way to get your drug studied, right? And so, like what cystic fibrosis did is they genotyped all their patients, right? And they established centers of excellence. So they had investigators ready, and as soon as a treatment came along that targeted a certain genotype in cystic fibrosis, they already knew who those people were, and they'd actually like kind of already signed them up to get studied. So they could do, somebody said, well, why these trials take so long? Part of it is hard for people to find and recruit the patients. If that recruitment phase takes years, then the trial will have to take even more years, however long the trial takes. So that, in identifying the patients, having them ready for study, and eager to get into trials and so forth, I think you're making some further advancements here, which is, okay, we have different populations of within this disease based on time and rate of progression, okay? And each of those populations are worthy of study, and you can identify benefits for each group, right? Not just walking time, but all sorts of benefits. And so each one of those might be worthwhile to study. But it will attract developers and so forth if you have, you know, a way, an easy way, if the community is kind of aligned around how can we get the patients into trials and so forth. Now, there are numerous, as people have alluded to, targets for study here. And with any serious disease like this, there's so many questions that need to be answered. And we're talking about shot on goal, like one trial, answer one question, make one bit of progress, maybe, as you said, per generation. That's not acceptable. That's not fast enough. Okay, we got to have knowledge turns that are much quicker, right? So that we can iterate and build on knowledge and gradually progress against the disease, or maybe make some big quantum leaps if possible. For example, I think we really don't know, Billy, you can correct me if this is true, but we don't really know the timing, the regimen, the correct dose of corticosteroids. Is that fair? It's an open question, and who should have a higher dose, and what biomarkers we might use. You know, there are side effects, as you all are extremely well aware, okay? And so how do we target that corticosteroid intervention properly, okay, to have the best bang for the buck with the least side effects? Well, that's a whole series of questions. Okay, and you can't answer those questions without doing studies, unfortunately, okay? And right now, of course, nobody wants to do studies because somebody will have to support those studies. But those are very important questions. As Pat well knows, my real issue with everybody on this is that I think a great extent this is inflammatory disease, right? Muscle destruction is due to inflammatory processes, and I believe that's been neglected. I think that's why corticosteroids work. They're anti-inflammatory drugs, right? And I recognize a number of other anti-inflammatories have been tried and have not been successful, but that just means we need to think more about this, because corticosteroids are just like the most toxic anti-inflammatory you could probably think about, right? So there are all kind of questions, even like about existing therapy, the approved therapy that's out there that most people or many people take. There are questions about are there better ways? Could we use some other anti-inflammatory therapies? Could we alter them? Could we remove some of the toxicities we're observing by doing this in a different manner in some way, right? And then, of course, there are all the new therapies that are coming on board, as everyone was saying, and those all will have many questions. Who should they be used in? What age groups? What should be measured in each age group, and so forth. And so I've been talking to Pat. Pat and I often think very similarly. We've had a meeting internally with Pat and the FDA about inflammation and what might be done with other people. And then about, could the community actually become more engaged in this and set up what we call a master protocol? Now, I didn't come up with this. This was strictly a discussion that the community's been having. What is a master protocol, and why should we be talking about this? Well, many of the issues I've been raising are the fact that it's so hard to answer these questions right now. And many of the issues you've been raising is, why can't children get into trials or adults get into trials, okay, when there's so many people who need to be treated and there's so many questions that need to be answered. And part of this is every company does its own trials. This isn't something FDA requires. This is how companies are, okay? They like to do their own stuff and so forth. However, some groups have set up what are called master protocols, and there the community or consortium controls the study, and they can test many different things in those studies. They could test corticosteroids at different doses or regimens. They could test many different things. And they can test a lot of new drugs. And they could test them in different age groups. I won't go into all the statistical design issues and so forth. But I think you can see that once you would set up something like that, it could have a life of its own. Master protocols are intended not to just test one intervention. They're intended to continuously improve the disease over time, the outcomes for the disease over the time, and test different things. Some things will turn out to be negative and they should be dropped quickly, okay? Other things look promising. Maybe they need more study. So instead of this, we're gonna do this one trial and then, and so forth. You could study a lot of different age groups. You could have different cohorts who have different stages of the disease where you're testing different outcomes because they, have different abilities and so forth. And this is, it's a heavy lift, all right? But this, if this can be gotten in place, many of the things, as I sat here listening to you, many of the questions you have, could be addressed by having this kind of setup. What would it require? Well, it requires money, right? And it requires investigators. Part of the problem with the current system is that, the investigators have their own jobs. They have to get tenure or whatever. They have to do this or that. If they're academics, they have to take care of patients. They don't have a job of continuously trying to improve the disease, right? And the companies, each company's their job is to get their own products evaluated and hopefully get them on the market. So somehow it falls somehow to patients to advocate for. We need a good learning machine that can actually build upon knowledge, rapidly evaluate multiple different questions at once, build on that knowledge, get the disease to the next level, and so forth. Now, I don't want to end this meeting by thinking, oh, this is a challenge, it's impossible, and we're not going to be able to do this, and so forth. I think there are incremental steps that the community can come forward and do that could get you closer to this. And so I don't think you need to do all this at once. But I think as I hear all your questions, I think this is one piece of the puzzle that either through philanthropy or through coming together or through different means that you can take part of the sort of fate of the improvement in this disease into the patient's hands, because the patients and the people who advocate for them are the most committed. Usually they're committed every day of every hour to making this improvement happen. Now that's not to say the FDA or the investigators out there or the companies are not committed to this, but they each have their own separate agendas that they have to follow. So I think many of the things that you've been concerned about, like what kind of therapies should we be on now, or interventions are most beneficial, how can we figure that out, what kind of interventions are coming along and how quickly will they be evaluated, who will they be evaluated in, what endpoints might be used. I mean, I don't even agree with the neurologist, Billy knows this well. I think CK is like a really important biomarker if you believe muscular dystrophy is an inflammatory disease, okay? Partly, right? I'm well aware of the root cause and so forth. And we don't, so master protocols, my point is, can be used to evaluate biomarkers and their performance under different conditions, along with all these other things it can be used for. In addition, this could help, and there are a bunch of ongoing registries, and sometimes these can be brought in and merged into a sort of ongoing, broader effort to, merge natural history, intervention, and so forth all together, so you get a really complete picture what the disease is right now, what it has been, and then what is the effect of these interventions, if anything. So I think that's what I was asked to talk about. I hope I didn't take too long or too short, but it sounds like this was a very meaningful day. My hat is off to you all for coming. I know you have more busy lives than most of us can even imagine, and there's a lot of stress, but from these kind of origins can come great things. So thank you very much.
So I'm the closer on this. I think that, first of all, we are a really good team, all of us, our federal partners, our industry partners, our families, our sons, all of us make a good team, and I think hope lives here. So I think if we can envision a day when the inclusion criteria for trials are expanded from little to adult, when there's less exposure to placebo, when we look at biomarkers to see if someone's responding to a given drug, and if they're not, wash them out quickly and get them in something else, where we can look at combinations, where that CK, we wake up and in the middle of the day take a CK and it's, we'll say 900 as opposed to 9,000. That would be quite a day. So I thank you all for listening. I thank you all for coming. I think we've made good progress. Not enough, not fast enough, but tomorrow's another day and we will. Thank you.